The courtroom had barely settled when Karen leaned forward, looked Judge Judy directly in the eyes and said it. "You're trash." 2 words. Flat, deliberate, loud enough for every person in that room to hear. No one moved. The clerk stopped typing. The bailiff straightened. Even the overhead lights seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the explosion that everyone assumed was coming. But Judge Judy didn't explode. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reach for her gavel. She didn't even blink. What she did instead was far worse for Karen. Because what followed those 2 words was not fury. It was not outrage. It was something Karen had never encountered before and would never forget after. It was patience. The kind of patience that belongs to someone who already knows exactly how this ends. Karen had walked into that courtroom with a plan. She had rehearsed her answers. She had dressed for confidence. She had worn her arrogance like a tailored jacket, fitted perfectly, impossible to wrinkle. She believed she was untouchable. She had no idea that sitting across from her was a woman who had spent decades watching people exactly like her unravel in exactly this room. And she had no idea that tucked inside a worn, dog-eared folder on the plaintiff's side of the courtroom was a single piece of evidence that would take everything Karen thought she had built and reduce it to rubble. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, surgically, completely. Before we go any further, welcome to Miller Media, the channel where truth always finds its way to the surface. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because you do not want to miss what happens next. And tell me, where are you watching this video from? Drop your city, your country, your corner of the world in the comments below. We love knowing who is watching now. Let's go back to that courtroom, because Karen is still sitting there smirking, completely unaware that Judge Judy is about to dismantle her one careful, devastating question at a time. Part 1 complete. Whenever you're ready, just say, "Start Part 2, and we'll move into the courtroom setup, where Karen's confidence is on full display and Judy begins laying the foundation of her trap. Next, Feb 24 Part 2 Obsitis its stage. The plaintiff's name was Renee. She was a schoolteacher, 34 years old, the kind of person who kept receipts not because she was suspicious by nature, but because she had learned, the hard way, that the world did not always reward trust with honesty. She sat at the plaintiff's table with both hands resting flat on a folder in front of her. The folder was thick. The edges had softened from weeks of handling. The corners were bent. It was not the folder of someone who had thrown this case together in a panic. It was the folder of someone who had stayed up past midnight, cross-referencing dates, organizing documents, rehearsing the truth so many times it had become second nature. Renee did not look at Karen when she walked in. Karen noticed. She made sure Renee noticed that she noticed. Karen settled into her chair at the defendant's table with the casual confidence of someone who had already decided how this day would go. She smoothed the front of her blazer. She glanced around the courtroom with the mild curiosity of a person attending someone else's problem. Then she folded her hands on the table, tilted her chin up slightly, and smiled the kind of smile that was never really a smile at all. It was a warning dressed as pleasantry. The case on paper appeared straightforward. Renee had hired Karen's home renovation company to repair water damage in her kitchen following a pipe leak. The damage was real. The need was urgent. Renee had saved carefully for months to cover the cost and had come to Karen based on a referral from a neighbor who called Karen's work exceptional. Karen had arrived at Renee's home. She had walked through the kitchen. She had examined the warped cabinets, the swollen baseboards, the water staining that had crept up the drywall like a slow tide. She had nodded knowingly. She had used words like manageable and straightforward and "I've seen far worse, honey." And then she had quoted Renee a price. Renee had asked for it in writing. Karen had laughed softly and said she preferred to keep things simple. Renee had asked again. Karen had sighed the sigh of someone being mildly inconvenienced by an overly cautious client and produced a single sheet of paper. A written estimate, signed at the bottom in looping, confident cursive. That piece of paper was now inside Renee's folder. Karen had spent the last 3 weeks telling anyone who would listen that it did not exist. Judge Judy entered the room, and every person in it rose without being asked. There was something about her presence that made ceremony feel unnecessary. She sat. She opened her file. She scanned the first page with the focused calm of someone reading a map they had already memorized. Then she looked up. Her eyes moved first to Renee, brief, measured, acknowledging, then to Karen. Karen met her gaze with a tight, pleasant expression, the expression of someone absolutely certain they were the smartest person in the room. Judy held her gaze for exactly 1 second longer than comfortable. Then she looked back down at her file and said simply, "We will begin." Karen's pleasant expression didn't falter, not yet, but the room felt it, that invisible shift, the way a sky changes color before a storm arrives. Nothing dramatic, nothing announced, just the unmistakable sense that something was coming. And that Karen, for all her preparation, was not ready for it. Judge Judy began the way she always did, not with accusations, not with theatrics, with questions. Simple, direct, almost conversational questions that carried the weight of a woman who already knew the answers and was simply waiting to see how many different ways the person across from her would choose to lie. Ms. Dalton, Judy said, addressing Karen by her last name with the kind of formality that left no room for familiarity. You contend that no written estimate was ever provided to the plaintiff. Is that correct? Karen leaned forward slightly, hands clasped, posture radiating certainty. That is absolutely correct, Your Honor. I do verbal estimates. Always have. It keeps things clean and simple. She knew that going. Judy did not respond immediately. She turned a page in her file. The sound was small. The pause was enormous. She knew that going in. Judy repeated, not as a question, as an echo. The kind of echo that makes a statement sound different the second time around. Karen nodded. Yes, I made it clear from the beginning. And yet, Judy said, her eyes still on the page in front of her. Ms. Parker tells this court that she specifically requested a written estimate before agreeing to any work. She looked up. Are you saying she is mistaken? Karen's smile tightened by a fraction. I'm saying she misremembers. The word landed in the room and just sat there. Judy tilted her head slightly. She misremembers. People do, Karen said, spreading her hands with a small sympathetic shrug, as if she felt genuinely sorry for Renee's faulty memory, especially when they're emotional about something. They convince themselves of things that didn't happen. From the plaintiff's table, Renee drew a slow breath through her nose. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had been advised to let the document speak first. She had agreed. It was taking everything she had. Judy looked at her briefly, a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned back to Karen. Ms. Dalton, how long have you been operating your renovation business? Karen brightened slightly, comfortable on familiar ground. 11 years, Your Honor. 11 years. Clean, happy clients. 11 years, Judy said. And in 11 years of verbal-only estimates, you never once provided a client with a written document. That's correct. Judy reached into the file, slowly, without urgency. She produced a single sheet of paper and held it at an angle, not showing it fully, just enough for Karen to see that something existed. Then perhaps, Judy said, her voice quieting in a way that made the entire room lean forward. You can explain why your business name appears at the top of this document. Karen's smile did not disappear, but something behind it did. Her eyes tracked the paper the way a person tracks a car they realize is heading toward them too fast. She could not see it fully yet. She could only see enough to feel the specific cold that comes with recognition. What is that? She asked, and for the first time, her voice carried a question it had not planned to ask. We'll get there, Judy replied. She set the paper face down on her bench with a soft, deliberate precision that somehow communicated more than any dramatic reveal could have. Karen's fingers moved beneath the table, just slightly, just enough. Renee felt it before she saw it. The atmosphere of the room had changed. The careful, constructed confidence Karen had carried through the door was developing a fracture, not visible to the casual eye, but there, spreading slowly from the inside out the way ice cracks beneath weight it was never meant to hold. Judy folded her hands and looked at Karen with an expression that was not unkind, but was completely without mercy. Let's talk about the day you visited Ms. Parker's home, she said. Karen straightened. I visited briefly. It was a preliminary walkthrough. Nothing formal, Judy repeated. Correct. And during this informal visit, Judy continued, did you examine the damage? I glanced at it. Yes. Did you give her any indication of cost? Karen paused a second too long. I gave her a general ballpark, verbally. Judy's eyebrow rose a fraction. A ballpark. Just a rough range. Judy nodded slowly, as if filing that answer somewhere very specific for very deliberate use later. Then she picked up her pen, made a small notation, and said nothing for a moment that stretched long enough to make Karen shift almost imperceptibly in her seat. Ms. Parker, Judy said, turning to Renee. When Ms. Dalton visited your home, did she give you a ballpark range? Renee's voice was steady and quiet. No, Your Honor, she gave me a specific number, and then she wrote it down, and then she signed it. Karen's head snapped toward her. That is not. You'll have your turn, Judy said without raising her voice, without looking up. Karen closed her mouth. The fracture spread a little further, and Judge Judy turned the page. Judge Judy lifted the paper, not dramatically, not with fanfare. She simply turned it over and held it at a natural reading angle, the way a person holds something they have already read several times and no longer need to perform surprise about. The courtroom saw it before Karen could stop herself from reacting. A single page, a header, a list of itemized costs, and at the bottom in the same looping, confident cursive that Karen used to sign everything, a signature. Renee exhaled quietly. Karen stared at the page the way someone stares at a fire they were certain they had put out. Ms. Dalton. Judy said, her voice carrying no particular emotion. This document bears your business letterhead, your itemized pricing, and your signature at the bottom. She set it down facing Karen. Would you like a moment to look at it? Karen leaned forward. Her eyes moved across the page in quick, darting passes like someone searching for an exit inside a room with no doors. Then she sat back. That, she said carefully, is not my signature. The words dropped into the room and immediately felt wrong, not just to the audience. To Karen herself, judging by the way her jaw tightened after she said them. Judy looked at her signature. No. Karen folded her arms. Someone could have copied it, traced it. People do that, especially when they want to make someone look guilty. Renee's composure held, but her eyes closed briefly. The way they do when something said out loud is so far from the truth it causes a kind of physical discomfort. Judy turned to her. Ms. Parker, where did this document come from? She handed it to me, Renee said simply. At my kitchen table, after she walked through the damage. She filled it out by hand while I made coffee. I watched her sign it. Karen laughed short and sharp. That is a complete fabrication, Ms. Dalton. Judy's voice did not rise, but it compressed, the way pressure compresses before something gives way. You are calling the plaintiff a fabricator. I'm saying she is confused. Or she is lying. One of the two. Confused, Judy said. Yes. Judy reached into the file again. She produced a second sheet and placed it beside the first. Side by side, both visible, both facing Karen. This, Judy said, tapping the left page, is the signature on the estimate Miss Parker provided. She tapped the right. And this is your signature from the contract you signed when you registered your business 11 years ago. The room went very still. Even people who had no legal training, no expertise in handwriting, no professional eye for detail could see it. The loops were identical. The way the capital D curved back on itself. The way the final letter of her last name lifted slightly at the end, like a small, habitual flourish. Even the pressure of the pen, slightly heavier on the downstrokes, matched with the consistency of something done 10,000 times without thinking. Karen looked at both pages. She said nothing. Judy waited.
Karen stopped.
Started again? I sign a lot of documents. Maybe someone studied my signature. Maybe she gestured toward Renee without looking at her. Maybe she practiced it. She could have found examples online. Judy set her pen down. A gesture that in her courtroom meant she was no longer taking notes because what was happening no longer required documentation. It was self-evident. Ms. Dalton, she said. Are you genuinely suggesting that Miss Parker, a schoolteacher, researched your 11-year-old business registration, located your original signature, practiced replicating it with sufficient accuracy to fool a court, hand-wrote an entire itemized estimate in your professional format, and did all of this in order to sue you for a sum that barely covers 2 months of her salary? The question hung in the air, fully assembled, completely unanswerable. Karen opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes moved to the wall just past Judy's shoulder, the instinctive gaze of someone whose mind is searching desperately for something that is no longer there. I'm just saying. She finally managed. That things aren't always what they look like. No, Judy agreed, quietly. They are not. She reached into the file one final time, and what she produced next was not a document. It was a photograph, standard size, color slightly glossy, the kind printed from a home printer on decent paper. She placed it on the bench and looked at it for a moment before raising her eyes to Karen with an expression that was entirely unreadable. Ms. Dalton, she said, I want you to look at this photograph and tell me what you see. She slid it across the bench toward Karen. Karen reached for it. The moment her eyes landed on the image, her hand stopped moving, just stopped, suspended above the photograph as if her body had processed what her mind was refusing to accept. The photo showed Karen's car, parked directly in front of Renee's house. The address clearly visible on the mailbox at the edge of the frame. The timestamp burned into the bottom right corner in digital white numbers. It was dated the same day Karen swore she had never been there. And there, through the windshield, slightly blurred but unmistakably present, was Karen herself, looking down at something in her lap. Renee's neighbor had taken it from her front porch. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. She'd simply been testing a new camera and had snapped a few shots of the quiet afternoon street. She had no idea she was documenting a lie. Karen withdrew her hand from the photograph as if it had burned her. The courtroom felt the temperature drop. Judge Judy looked at her with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. Would you like to revise? She said softly. Anything you have told this court today. Karen's carefully constructed world had just developed a crack wide enough for everyone to see through, and Judge Judy had only just begun. The bailiff moved toward the courtroom door with the quiet efficiency of someone following an instruction that had been arranged long before Karen ever took her seat. Karen watched him cross the room. Her eyes narrowed. Her fingers, which had been resting loosely on the table since the photograph destroyed her last denial, curled inward slowly, the way hands do when the body senses something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. The door opened. A woman stepped inside. She was in her mid-50s, neat, composed. She wore a cardigan the color of autumn leaves, and carried herself with the particular steadiness of someone who had rehearsed this moment not to perform it, but to survive it. Her eyes moved around the courtroom once briefly, then settled on Judge Judy with quiet resolve. She did not look at Karen. Karen looked at her, and the color that had been slowly draining from Karen's face over the last hour disappeared entirely. Because she knew this woman. This was Patricia Helms, Renee's neighbor. The woman whose front porch sat at an angle that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the street. The woman who had spent 30 years in medical administration and understood better than most the importance of accurate records and honest documentation. The woman who had taken the photograph. Judge Judy inclined her head. Please state your name for the record. Patricia Helms. Her voice was calm and unhurried. Ms. Helms, Judy said, you submitted the photograph currently in evidence. Can you tell this court the circumstances under which it was taken? Patricia folded her hands in front of her. I was on my porch that afternoon testing a new camera my son had given me for my birthday. I took several photographs of the street. When Renee told me what had happened, I looked back through the images and realized I had captured something relevant. Did you alter the photograph in any way? No, Your Honor, not in any way. Did anyone ask you to take it? No. It was entirely accidental. Jody nodded. Then she turned to Karen with the measured patience of someone laying the final stone in a very deliberate path. Ms. Dalton. This photograph was taken by a neighbor with no personal stake in this case, on a camera with an unaltered timestamp, on the exact date you told this court you were not present at Ms. Parker's home. Karen leaned forward, and the desperation in her voice had sharpened into something that almost sounded like aggression. She could have changed the date on the camera. Anyone can do that. You just go into the settings and, Ms. Helms. Judy interrupted without acknowledging Karen's theory. Did you adjust the date or time settings on your camera before or after taking this photograph? Patricia looked mildly affronted by the question itself. Absolutely not. Thank you. Judy made a small note. You may step aside. Patricia moved quietly to the side of the room. As she passed Karen's table, she did not glance down. She did not need to. Her presence alone had already said everything. Karen watched her go, jaw-tight, eyes burning with the specific fury of someone who has just watched their last viable excuse walk out of reach. Judy set down her pen. Ms. Dalton, she said. You have now told this court that the written estimate was forged, that the signature was fabricated, that the photograph was manipulated, and that the witness has a motive to lie. She paused. Do you see the pattern you are creating? Karen's mouth opened. I'm defending myself. You are constructing a conspiracy, Judy replied, her tone almost gentle, which somehow made it worse, in which a schoolteacher, her neighbor, and an 11-year-old business registration have all coordinated to destroy you. She tilted her head slightly. Does that seem reasonable to you? The question required no answer. The room provided one anyway, in the form of a silence so complete it pressed against the walls. Renee sat perfectly still. Her hands were no longer gripping the folder. They rested open on the table, palms down, the posture of someone who no longer needed to hold on quite so tightly. Karen looked at the table in front of her. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she had nothing to say. No deflection ready, no theory assembled. Just the hollow, nauseating feeling of a person watching the last exit disappear. Judy let the silence last exactly as long as it needed to. Then she spoke again, and her voice carried something new. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something closer to the tone a person uses when they are about to open a door that cannot be closed again. Before we proceed to the financial records, she said, there is one additional piece of evidence that was submitted to this court. She reached into the file with the unhurried precision that by now made every person in the room hold their breath. It is not a document, it is not a photograph. She produced a single printed transcript. 3 paragraphs, single-spaced. It is a voicemail, Judy said. Left by you, Ms. Dalton, on Ms. Parker's phone. 4 days after Ms. Parker formally disputed your invoice. Karen's head dropped forward slightly. Just an inch, just enough. The room felt it. Judy looked at the transcript for a moment without reading it aloud. She let the anticipation settle into every corner of the room like weather moving in. Then she looked up at Karen with an expression stripped of everything except clarity. Would you like to tell this court what you said? She asked. Before I read it. Karen's throat moved. She swallowed. Her voice when it came was barely above a whisper. I was upset, she said. I'm sure you were, Judy replied. What did you say? Karen pressed her lips together, shook her head once, a tiny motion, almost imperceptible. The gesture of someone who knows the answer and cannot bear to be the one to give it. Judy looked down at the transcript, and she began to read. The words came out one by one, quiet and precise, each one landing in the courtroom like a stone dropped into still water. Karen had called Renee knave. She had told her she didn't understand how the real world worked. She had told her that people who complained instead of paying were the reason good businesses struggled. She had told her, in a voice dripping with condescension so thick it had survived being converted to text, that she should be grateful anyone had agreed to help her at all. And then, at the very end, in a tone that had shifted from contempt to something colder, she had said, "You're going to lose this. And when you do, I want you to remember that I gave you every chance to walk away with your dignity. You chose this, not me." The courtroom absorbed the words in complete silence. Renee's eyes were wet, not from weakness, from the particular pain of hearing in a public room full of strangers, the private cruelty that had been left on her phone at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, when she was sitting alone at her kitchen table, trying to figure out how to afford to fix her home. Judge Judy set the transcript down. She did not look at Karen immediately. She looked at Renee. "Ms. Parker," she said softly. "You kept this voicemail." Renee nodded. "I almost deleted it," she admitted. "But something told me to keep it." Judy held her gaze for a moment with an expression that, for the first time all morning, carried something that resembled warmth. Then she turned to Karen, and the warmth was gone. Judge Judy opened a new section of the file. The motion was small, routine even, but by now the entire courtroom understood that when Judge Judy turned a page, the world on the other side of it was never what the defendant hoped it would be. Karen watched her hands with the fixed, involuntary attention of someone who cannot look away from the thing that is about to hurt them. "Ms. Dalton," Judy said without looking up, "let's discuss your financials." Karen straightened slightly, a reflex, the last remaining fragment of her professional composure trying to reassemble itself from the wreckage of the last 40 minutes. "I run a legitimate business," she said. The words came out steadier than expected, practiced maybe, rehearsed for exactly this moment. "My books are clean. My pricing is standard for the industry. Whatever she told you about the numbers is exaggerated." Judy looked up. "Not a question." "Yes," Karen said. "She got one quote. She didn't like the price. That's not fraud. That's just business." Judy nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they are giving a person enough rope to make their own decisions about what to do with it. "Let's look at that quote," she said. She produced the original estimate, the one with Karen's signature, the one Karen had spent the morning insisting did not exist. She placed it on the bench and turned it so the numbers faced the room. "The total quoted to Ms. Parker," Judy said, "for water damage repair to a standard residential kitchen was $4,800. She paused. "Are you familiar with the legal pricing guidelines for licensed contractors in this state, Ms. Dalton?" Karen's eyes moved to the document. "Pricing varies. Every job is different." "Does," Judy agreed. "Within a legally defined range." She produced a second sheet. "The maximum allowable quote for the scope of work described in this estimate, under the contractor regulations you agreed to when you obtained your license, is $1,600. The number sat in the room like a weight dropped from a height. Karen blinked. "That guideline is outdated. Costs have gone up. Materials are more expensive. Everyone in the industry charges 3 times the legal limit," Judy asked. The question was so clean it left no room for negotiation. Karen's mouth opened and closed once before she found words. "I wasn't aware of the exact current threshold." "You have been licensed for 11 years, Judy said, "and you were unaware of the pricing threshold you agreed to operate within." It wasn't a question either. It was a door closing. Karen looked down at the table. "I may have miscalculated." "You may have," Judy said. "Or you may have made a very deliberate calculation that assumed Miss Parker would not know her rights." She let that land before continuing. "We are going to find out which one it was." She reached into the file again, and this time what she produced made the room shift in a way that was almost physical. A collective lean forward, a collective intake of breath, the involuntary response of people watching something significant surface. It was a printed software log, columns of dates, timestamps, user activity. The kind of record that business accounting systems generate automatically and store quietly in the background, invisible and forgotten until someone with a court order thinks to ask for it. "This," Judy said, "is the activity log from your business invoicing software, requested by this court and provided by your software provider directly." She scanned the page. On the 14th of March, at 9:17 in the evening, an invoice was created, not the estimate already in evidence, a second document, a revised invoice with a new total. Karen went very still. On the 16th of March, Judy continued, her voice never wavering. "That invoice was deleted." She looked up, manually, "Using your account login, from your registered IP address." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a room full of people processing something they cannot unhear. Renee's hand moved to her mouth, not in shock exactly, more in the quiet vindication of someone who knew something was wrong and had spent weeks being told they were imagining it. Karen's voice came out thin and careful. Software glitches happen. Files get deleted by accident. That doesn't mean. At 9:17 in the evening, Judy said, you created the invoice. At 9:44 on the same evening, you sent an email. She produced a printed copy to Ms. Parker, informing her that you had reviewed her case and determined additional work was required, and that a revised invoice would follow. Karen stared at the email copy. The color in her cheeks had shifted from pale to something grayer. 2 days later, Judy continued, the revised invoice was deleted from your system. She set the log down. Ms. Parker never received it. But this court did, because deletion from a user interface does not mean deletion from a server. She slid a final printed page across the bench. The second invoice, higher than the first, not by a small margin, by nearly $2,000. Karen's jaw tightened so visibly that the room could see the muscle working beneath her cheek. Ms. Parker, Judy said, turning to Renee. Did you receive a revised invoice from Ms. Dalton? No, Your Honor, Renee said. She sent me an email saying one was coming. I waited, it never arrived. When I followed up, she told me she had decided the original estimate still stood. Judy nodded. Then she turned back to Karen with an expression that had moved past judgment and arrived somewhere quieter and more absolute. Ms. Dalton, she said. You created a second invoice for an amount significantly higher than the first. You informed the plaintiff it was coming. Then you deleted it before it arrived. She folded her hands. In the same week that Ms. Parker formally questioned your original pricing, Karen said nothing. That is not a software glitch, Judy said. That is not a miscalculation. That is not an oversight born of a busy schedule. She leaned forward slightly. That is a person who realized she had pushed too far, panicked, and tried to erase the evidence of her own intentions. The word intentions dropped into the room like a verdict of its own. Karen's hands were shaking now, not violently, just a fine, persistent tremor that she pressed flat against the table to hide, which only made it more visible. Renee watched her from across the room with an expression that held no triumph in it whatsoever, only the exhausted, bewildered sorrow of someone watching another person reveal themselves to be so much worse than they had hoped. Judy picked up her pen, made a notation, set it down again. There is one more thing, she said quietly. Karen's eyes closed briefly, just for a second. The involuntary response of a person who has reached the end of their capacity to absorb consequence and knows, with terrible clarity, that more is coming regardless. During the court's review of your business records, Judy said, a pattern emerged that extends beyond this case. She did not produce another document. She simply looked at Karen directly. Ms. Parker is not the first client to have raised a pricing dispute with your business. The room stirred. Karen's eyes opened. In the past 3 years, Judy continued, 4 separate complaints were filed with the Contractor Licensing Board against your business. All 4 were dismissed due to lack of documentation. She paused. Because in each case, the clients could not produce written evidence. The implication settled over the courtroom like a fog. Renee's expression shifted, the pieces of something larger clicking together behind her eyes. Karen shook her head, and for the first time the denial sounded less like argument and more like pleading. Those complaints were baseless, every single one. Those clients were confused. Judy offered. Karen stopped. Her own word from earlier in the morning, came back and sat between them like an accusation wearing a polite disguise. Judy looked at her steadily. Ms. Dalton, the difference between you and those 4 previous clients is sitting at that table. She gestured toward Renee. She asked for it in writing. The room absorbed that. Simple, devastating, true. Karen looked at Renee then, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time since they entered the courtroom together. And something in her expression shifted in a way that had nothing to do with strategy or performance or survival. It looked for just a moment like recognition. The recognition of a person finally seeing the full shape of what they have done. Judge Judy let the silence hold. Then she closed the financial section of the file with a soft, final sound, and reached for the last page. Judge Judy did not open the last page immediately. She rested her hand on it, flat still. The way a person rests their hand on something before deciding whether the world is ready for what is inside it. The courtroom felt the weight of that pause in a way that no gavel strike could have produced. It was the silence of a room that understood, collectively and instinctively, that whatever came next would not be about invoices or timestamps or deleted files. It would be about something older than this case. Something Karen had carried in long before Renee ever walked into her shop. Ms. Dalton, Judy said, her voice lower now, stripped of the courtroom formality it had worn all morning. Not soft exactly, but human. The tone of a woman who has presided over enough broken people to recognize when the surface of a case is not the whole of it. Before I open this final document, I want to ask you something. Karen looked up from the table. Her eyes were dry but hollow. The particular hollowness that comes not from absence of emotion, but from too much of it compressed into too small a space for too long. Why did you need the money? Judy asked. The question was so simple it took the room off guard. Karen blinked, her lips parted. She had prepared for legal questions, for challenges about dates and signatures and software logs. She had not prepared for this. She started. Stopped. Judy waited. The bailiff did not move. The gallery did not stir. Even the ventilation system seemed to quiet itself, as if the building understood that something real was about to happen and had the decency to make room for it. Karen's hands came up from the table and folded in front of her face. Not dramatically, not performatively. The way hands move when a person is trying to hold themselves together from the outside, because the inside has already started to come apart. I was behind, she said finally. The words came out stripped of everything, no spin, no framing, just the bare, tired truth of them. I had been behind for a long time. Judy nodded once. Behind on what? Karen exhaled, a long, uneven breath that carried the weight of something that had been held in for months. Maybe longer. Everything, she said. The business lease, the equipment loans, a personal debt She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. There was a loan I took from someone close to me, someone who trusted me, and I hadn't paid it back. The room was completely still. Who did you borrow from? Judy asked. Karen's jaw tightened. For a moment it seemed like she might redirect, might find the last remaining fragment of her defenses and deploy it here. But the fight had gone out of her somewhere between the voicemail transcript and the deleted invoice. And what remained was not the woman who had walked in with her chin raised and her arrogance polished. What remained was someone much smaller, and somehow, because of that, much more real. My sister, Karen said. The word landed quietly. Renee looked up from her hands. Patricia, still standing to the side of the room, lowered her eyes. Even the gallery, filled with strangers who owed Karen nothing, seemed to absorb the word with something gentler than judgment. How much? Judy asked. Karen swallowed. $18,000, over 2 years. She gave it to me in pieces because I kept telling her I was almost back on track. Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough. I wasn't. I kept spending. On things I didn't need. Things that made me feel like I was still. Like the business was still. She shook her head. Like I was still someone worth taking seriously. Judy let that breathe. And your sister, she said. Does she know what happened to the money? Karen nodded. A small miserable motion. She found out 8 months ago. She went through my accounts after I missed a repayment for the 4th time. She paused. She hasn't spoken to me since. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. Full of the kind of recognition that passes through a room when a person's cruelty is finally explained. Not excused, never excused, but explained. Given a shape. Given a history. Given the context of a human being who had been falling for a long time before they decided to take someone else down with them. Renee was looking at Karen now, directly, with an expression that was achingly complicated. The face of someone trying to hold on to the anger they were entitled to while simultaneously being confronted with a grief they had not expected to feel for the person who hurt them. Dalton, Judy said quietly. When Miss Parker walked into your shop, what did you see? Karen looked at the table. An opportunity, she whispered. The admission cost her visibly. Her shoulders dropped with it, as if the word itself had taken something structural out of her posture. And what did she actually come to you for? Karen closed her eyes. Help, she said. The word barely made it out. She just needed help. The room held that. Judy did not rush past it. She let it sit exactly as long as it needed to, because some truths deserve the space to be fully heard before anything else is said about them. Then she spoke again, and her voice carried the particular weight of someone delivering not just a judgment but a reckoning. Dalton, the most dangerous thing about what you did is not the overcharging. It is not the forged deletion or the manipulated dates. She paused. It is the fact that you looked at a person who trusted you, a person who reminded you in some way of the people you had already failed, and instead of doing better, you did the same thing again. Because it was easier than changing. Karen's breath caught. Her hand came up to cover her mouth, and this time the gesture was not performance. It was the involuntary response of a person hearing the exact truth about themselves spoken aloud in a language they cannot argue with. I know, she whispered. I know that. Knowing it, Judy replied, is only the beginning. Renee looked down at her folder, the worn edges, the bent corners, weeks of her life organized into a stack of papers because she had insisted on being believed when every instinct told her to just let it go, just absorb the loss, just move on. She had not let it go, And sitting in that courtroom, hearing Karen's confession fill the air around her, she understood with quiet and absolute certainty that she had been right not to. "Your Honor," Renee said softly. Judy looked at her. "I don't want her to lose her business," Renee said. The words surprised the room. They seemed to surprise Renee herself slightly, as if she had not known she was going to say them until they were already out. "I just wanted someone to believe me. I just wanted it to be real. What happened to me?" Judy held her gaze for a long moment. "It is real," she said. "And this court believes you." Renee nodded. Her eyes filled but did not spill. The composure of someone who had been waiting a very long time to hear those 3 words from someone with the authority to mean them. Karen looked at her from across the room, and for the first time all morning she did not look away. "I'm sorry," Karen said. "Not to the court, not to the record, to Renee, directly, personally, without any machinery of self-preservation wrapped around it. I am genuinely sorry. Not because I got caught," her voice broke slightly, "because you deserved better than what I gave you. And I knew that. I knew it the whole time." The courtroom sat with that. Judge Judy looked at both women for a moment, then down at the final page beneath her hand. "There is one more thing this court needs to address," she said. Her voice had returned to its measured, judicial register, but something in it had changed. It was still precise, still unflinching, but underneath the authority, there was a thread of something that sounded almost like resolve. The kind that comes not from anger but from the firm, unshakable belief that real accountability is not punishment. It is the only honest form of care. She lifted the final page. "And when I read what is on this document," she said, "I want you both to understand that what happens next is not the end of either of your stories." She looked at Karen. "But it is the end of this chapter." Karen straightened. Not in defiance, in acceptance. The posture of someone who has finally stopped running and turned around to face what has been chasing them. And Judge Judy began to read. Judge Judy read the final page in silence first, just her eyes moving across it. Steady. Unhurried. The way a person reads something they want to understand completely before they give it to the world. The courtroom waited with the particular stillness of a room that has been through something together. Not just witnessed it. Been through it. The kind of shared experience that changes the air in a space, that makes strangers sitting in rows feel, briefly and unexpectedly, like they are part of the same story. Karen sat with her hands folded on the table. Still, no tapping, no fidgeting. No performance of confidence or innocence or victimhood. Just a woman sitting with the full weight of what she had done, no longer trying to redistribute that weight onto anyone else. Renee sat across from her, her folder closed in her lap, her hands resting open on top of it. The posture of someone who had finally, after weeks of carrying something heavy entirely alone, been allowed to set it down. Judy finished reading. She placed the page flat on her bench, aligned it carefully with the edges of the file. Then she looked up and addressed the courtroom with the quiet authority of someone who has spent a lifetime understanding that justice, real justice, is not about volume or spectacle. It is about truth, clearly stated, fully witnessed, impossible to take back. "Ms. Dalton," she began, "this court has reviewed the evidence in its entirety, the written estimate bearing your signature, the photograph placing you at the plaintiff's home on the date you denied visiting, the software log confirming the creation and deliberate deletion of a second invoice, the voicemail you left for the plaintiff 4 days after she disputed your charges, and the pattern of prior complaints filed against your business, each one dismissed for lack of written documentation that in this case, the plaintiff had the presence of mind to secure." Karen did not move, did not nod, did not react. She simply listened, with the particular attentiveness of someone receiving something they know they have earned. "The evidence does not suggest a misunderstanding," Judy continued. "It does not suggest a miscalculation or an administrative oversight or a difference of professional opinion. It suggests a deliberate, calculated attempt to exploit a client who expressed trust, asked reasonable questions, and made the mistake, if we can call it that, of believing you meant to help her." Renee's breath came slow and even. Her eyes were fixed on Judy with an expression of quiet, exhausted attention. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff," Judy said. The words were simple. 4 words. But they landed in the room with the force of everything that had led to them. Every document, every denial, every crack in Karen's facade, every quiet, dignified moment of Renee holding her worn folder and refusing to be made to feel like she had imagined her own experience. Renee's eyes closed just for a second, just long enough to feel it. "Ms. Dalton," Judy continued, "you will pay the plaintiff the full disputed amount of $4,800. She paused. "You will additionally reimburse her for the cost of the independent repair work she was forced to commission after your delays left her kitchen unusable for 6 weeks. That amount, as documented and submitted to this court, is $2,200. Karen nodded, a single motion, accepting. The total judgment against you, Judy said, is $7,000. The number settled into the room without drama. It was not a fortune. It was not a ruin. It was exactly what it was. The precise financial cost of choosing deception over honesty in a dispute that could have been resolved with a conversation. Additionally, Judy said, and her voice shifted here, taking on a gravity that went beyond the financial, this court will formally refer your conduct to the State Contractor Licensing Board for review. The pattern of pricing complaints, combined with the evidence of record manipulation and deliberate document deletion presented in this case, constitutes sufficient grounds for a licensing inquiry. Karen swallowed. This, more than the money, seemed to land differently. The business she had built over 11 years, the one she had leveraged and borrowed against and ultimately compromised, now faced a scrutiny that no amount of deleted invoices could prevent. I understand, she said quietly. Judy looked at her for a moment, and what came next was not on any legal document. It was not part of the ruling. It was something else entirely. The kind of thing that gets said in courtrooms by people who have seen enough of human nature to know that consequence alone is never the whole answer. Ms. Dalton, she said, you are not a lost cause. Karen looked up, surprised despite everything by the direction those words came from. You built something, Judy said. 11 years is not nothing. The skills you have are real. The work you are capable of is real. What brought you to this room was not incompetence. It was fear. And the choices fear pushed you toward when you decided that hiding was easier than asking for help. Karen's eyes glistened. She pressed her lips together hard. Fear is not an excuse, Judy continued. But it is a beginning. If you choose to make it one. She held Karen's gaze for a moment that felt longer than it was. Call your sister. The two words fell into the room like stones into still water. Simple, quiet, carrying more weight than anything else said in the last 2 hours. Karen's composure broke then, not loudly, not dramatically. The way things break when they have been held together past their limit for too long. A single breath that came out uneven. Eyes that filled before she could stop them. Hands that pressed flat against the table because they needed something solid to hold on to. She nodded, unable to speak, but present in a way she had not been since she walked through the door. Judy turned to Renee. Ms. Parker, she said. Her voice carried something warmer now. The particular warmth that belongs to the moment after a long battle when the person who deserved to win finally does. You came into this courtroom with documentation, composure, and honesty. You did not exaggerate. You did not retaliate. You simply told the truth and trusted this process to recognize it. Renee nodded. Her eyes were bright, her throat visibly tight. You were right to, Judy said. And this court is glad you did not walk away. Renee exhaled, long, slow. The breath of someone who had been waiting weeks for permission to finally let go of the thing they had been carrying alone. Thank you, Your Honor, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was steady, completely steady. The voice of someone who had just been handed back something that had been taken from them, not just money, not just validation, but the simple, profound dignity of being believed. Judge Judy gathered the papers in front of her into a neat, final stack. She did not rush the moment. She let it exist fully. Let every person in that room sit inside it for a breath or two, because moments like this one, moments where truth wins cleanly and completely in a room full of witnesses, deserve to be felt before they are filed away. Then she picked up her gavel. She looked at Karen one last time, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with the steady, unflinching gaze of a woman who has spent her life believing that accountability, delivered with honesty and without cruelty, is one of the most important things one human being can offer another. Fix it, she said simply. All of it. Karen nodded. And this time it was not the nod of someone performing remorse for an audience. It was the nod of someone making a decision. The gavel came down. One clean, resonant strike. And in the silence that followed, the kind of silence that only arrives after something true and necessary has been fully said, the courtroom exhaled together. Renee stood slowly, gathering her folder for the last time, the edges still soft, the corners still bent, a record of every sleepless night and quiet doubt and moment of wondering whether anyone would ever believe her. She held it for a moment. Then she set it down on the table. She didn't need it anymore. And that is exactly what happens when someone chooses truth over silence, documentation over doubt, and the quiet courage to walk into a room and simply tell the truth until the room has no choice but to listen. Karen walked in believing arrogance was armor. Judge Judy showed her, one careful, devastating question at a time, that it never was. And Renee walked out with something no invoice could ever capture. She walked out believed. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep it gets buried, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit that like button. Leave a comment below telling us what moment hit you hardest. And if you are not yet part of the Miller Media family, subscribe right now. Because this is what we do here. We find the moments where truth walks into a room and refuses to leave until it has been fully heard. We will see you in the next one.